Hey everyone, this is the first in a series of videos on Warcraft Logs. You can consider this Warcraft Logs 101. This video series is being developed by myself, Quiskle, from the Ember Guild on Zul'jin, and its primary focus is to teach people in my personal guild how to use Warcraft Logs effectively for each fight. So there'll be a total of 13 videos for the main raid series in Hellfire Citadel. I'm going to take a video for each boss to go in and show how you can effectively see what your guild or raid team is having issues with and how to solve those issues effectively. But like I said, this first video is very just basic. It's how to navigate the site and how to look up some different stats about your raid team, or how to get into rankings, or how to see where to start from the get-go. Long about ways to say, just as an introduction video. Right. So as we move on really quick, now if you're in Ember and if you sign up through Warcraft Logs, it's going to give you a separate application for you to do with logs. Now usually there's a specific officer in charge of maintaining the guild's logs for each raid run. But anyway, let's get started. So in the Warcraft log screen, I'm already logged in, so you can set yourself up to be registered with a guild. So it'll appear right through here as if you're already registered. Now, if for some reason you're not, and you need to look up someone else's guild's logs or players, you can merely search for it, and then it'll give you a list of not only the guilds but characters if they have that name. And it's sort of smart. Like you can see, it won't just type in exactly what we see, but also variations of that name. Okay, so we're going to go into my personal guild's log, and when you click on that guild page, it's going to take you to the guild calendar first of all. Now anytime someone logs a run and has their account set to run a guild log, it'll pop up on this counter. Now my guild has 3 raid teams, so you'll see that if we go back into February, there's going to be a lot of logs to go through. Okay, so once again, the only thing weird about this is it starts with Monday, so don't get confused if you raid on Sunday and don't see your team's logs on the far left hand side. So in this format, you can basically just click on, you can hover, and it will tell you what fights are included in that log, so you don't have to fully load the entire log. And you can do it month by month. Okay, the reports tab is the same information that is included in the calendar. It's just in a table format, so it's a little bit easier to read. Now if you notice here really quick, just while we're here, you can see that there's an expires tab right here. Now Warcraft logs will keep logs for a decent amount of time. However, there's one guy that runs Warcraft logs, Final Fantasy 14 logs, a bunch of different log sites. He runs them all, and he pays for service through Amazon Cloud Service. So if you do him a favor and through Patreon pay him $10 or more a month, you get added benefits to your Warcraft log service. Your logs will never expire, your rankings will be processed immediately, and your logs are hosted on a fast server as opposed to one of the slower Amazon servers. So as long as someone in the guild, only one person has to do it, is subscribed through Patreon, then all of these should show never expire. You can also toggle if you want your logs public or private each time through here. Once again, you can just go through and edit by team, guild team. We're going to get into that when we get over to the management tab. But characters really quick. You can go through and see all the characters that are in your guild's logs. Now, rank 0s, GMs, rank 1s are officers. And then these are just actual guild ranks in the guild. Over in the management tab, In this tab, we can see where we can manage the teams. So you can create new guild teams, and then when people from that team upload their logs, they can go in and choose to upload to that team specifically. Let me exit out of that real quick. Alright. There is an attendance tab. It defaults to the past however many weeks. Now this is going to look really complicated because you see a lot of people may only show up for one raid, or it may be an alt, or it may be a fun run or a pickup group that you're logging or something like that. But once you go in and you can divide it by teams, like if we pull up Fire's team, we can see attendance over the past couple months based on that team's, based on the individual members of that team. Okay. Now, how this applies attendance is it checks the logs for who shows up in that night's logs at all. So it doesn't really count tardies, but as long as they're there for that night at some point for at least one fight, it will show them as present for that night. Now, down here at the bottom, you can see a copy CSV little icon right over here. So you can print out the attendance in a PDF format, or you can use a CSV and export it to Excel. So if you're, I don't know, an accountant in real life or something like that, and you're the person over attendance, you can put it out in an Excel file and play around with it that way. Now, one of the most important tabs that we're going to be talking about and using throughout this video series is the rankings tab. So specifically, this ranking tab within the guild page lists your rank by server, but only the members of your team. So it's sort of like an MVP page, if you will, out of the people that are in the guild. Excuse me. Now, once again, you can, you can go through and edit it by mythics. You can do it by heroics. Now this is fetching a lot of data because it goes in and fetches the individual player data, like each of their rankings, and then pulls it back and puts it all into one page for you. So this is like the most long loading page that you can take. Once again, so these are individual players. Now, what we're going to use this for here, let's change it back up to Mythic. We're going to be looking at guild execution. So, in this video series, we're going to be looking at the best parses that our guild has done and try to find the mistakes and ways to improve from that. So here you can see the best ever our guild did with Hellfire Assault was the third best on server. And so on and so forth, all the way down. Moving on to the widgets page. This is just a way that you can export the logs to a forum page, so someone on an outside forum page has easier access to the guild page site. Well, with recent wipes. Alright. So next, we're going to take up a simple fight. Let's go back to that rankings page in order to discuss the basic functions of the actual execution encounter fight page. Okay, so we'll always see that on the front page it'll be the title of whatever the logger decides to title it, the date, the fight. Now in this first tab, you can choose which fight to look at. We're going to just be looking at Hellfire Assault for this page. Now, if you have any wipes they'll also be listed here under the kill. And you'll also have the options to look at just the wipes, just the kill, or a combination of the two. Okay. Through the phases fight, if a encounter has distinctive phases, let's for example move on to Iron Reaver just for a second. Now if there's a specific fight, it'll specifically list out each fight phase. So we see that in this fight, for example, Raven did a lot of damage playing Affliction. But, however, if we shift it to the air phase, where the boss isn't there... Oh, there was no air phase in this one, because we killed it before he took off. But you understand the concept. If you can check people's damage output and mechanics via phase, as opposed to the entire fight. If for some reason someone has a specific role during a certain phase that you're just checking on. Alright. So the Analyze tab over here will have all your basic information on everyone. So if you hover over a player, you can see their damage, their DPS breakdown, if you're looking at their damage. And you can also change from damage done to something like healing. So you can look at the healer's perspective. How much they're healing, how much they're over healing, how much absorbs they're doing, and how much they're contributing if they're not a healer. Or how much self-healing they have. Uptimes, active HPS versus effective HPS, which we'll get into in a later point. But one of the biggest things, if you're going through Warcraft Logs trying to figure out where your damage is coming from, why you're dying, what are you messing up on, you can go through the damage taken tab. Now see, for this fight, you can see that everyone's pretty much roughly equal, taking anywhere between 1.6 to 2.8 million damage. And you can also see, if you hover over, where that damage is coming from. Okay? So once again, we'll go into the specific fights on what everything is and how, like, each fight maintains, like, what's expected to be acceptable levels of taking damage in each individual fight once that video gets made. So, once again, we have damage done, damage taking, healing, buffs. Now, with the buffs tab, we can go in, and it's more helpful to click on an individual player. So, let's take Nadius. Okay, so once we go to a specific player, it becomes a lot easier to read, as opposed to everyone's buffs all at one time. So here you can check at the individual player level what their uptimes on certain abilities. So we can see that this Shadow Priest had his RPPM trinket proc at the front. We can see that he pre-potted. We can see that he used his racial at the beginning, and we see his uptime on Bloodlust. We also see that he maintained a decent uptime on Twist of Fate. Once again, there's going to be yet another series to go into specific character uptimes and stuff like that. I'm going to try to do one for each spec. May not get around to it, but it's the eventual goal. Okay. So if we take a fight that has debuffs, like the Unstable Orb from Iron Reaver, we can see individual player uptimes. Now, we're going to go ahead and jump really quick. The other oh no, we do need to talk about resources really quick before we move on. But the main resource tab that we're going to talk about are players with some sort of combo points. So rogues with actual combo points, shadow priests with shadow orbs, monks with chi. So we can go in, or holy paladins with holy power. So we can go into the resources tab and check shadow orb generation. So if you have one of those classes that use combo points and feel like they're not really doing the DPS that they're supposed to do or doing stuff like that, you can go in and check and see their resource generation and check to see if they're wasting any of their resources. So here, for this Shadow Priest specifically, we see that over the course of the fight, he gained 26 Shadow Orbs, but didn't waste any of them. That means he didn't use a generating ability when he was at max Shadow Orbs. He was very good about maintaining, or not maximum Shadow Orbs, but just enough to do the damage. But if we switch to a healer, let's take Zestro for example. Oh, sometimes there's just errors. There's just errors sometimes. So let's see if we can get Aliana's. Pals, maybe? Okay. We'll go back to that in a sec through a different log. Let's go ahead and do that right now, actually. So, to get back, I'm just going to go to Ember. Go back to us. And then take a really quick look back at... Ladner's logs will have their proper amount of mana. So once again, we're going to go back and look at resources. And then we're going to make the report only look at certain people. So for this report, I want to look at Deja Vu's mana usage. So once again, it defaults to hit points. We can go down to something like mana. Let's actually look at chi really first, since we were talking about chi generation. So we can see that Day didn't waste any chi, and he got a lot of chi through jab, so he was fist weaving a lot. But if we take something and look at mana, we can see that throughout that chi generation, we can check his mana, and that he went approximately 4 minutes into the fight. It was for about a minute and a half before he channeled his mana T stacks to go back up. So you can use this as a reference to if your healers are feeling mana hungry, or when they're running out of mana, so you can see what you can do in terms of managing that mana better. So if we go to the other Mistweaver, yeah, he completely went to 4 minutes and then died. Let's go up to Ersu, which was the Discipline Priest. So we can see that she went about the 5.5 minute mark, and then just stopped healing for a little bit, but was using her mana management, Power Word Solace, to get back up and maintain throughout the fight. It was a long fight. Once again, these were wipe fights too. So on fights where there are interrupts, let's take Kilrog for example. Interrupts tab's pretty self-explanatory. When I look at everyone though, so it'll tell you in a fight the interrupts that have to be gotten or that should be gotten. It'll show those first. So we can see in this fight, Briscoe and Douche Knight were the only one that interrupted the Rending Howl by the ad in Kilrog, and that 2 of the casts were missed. Now, on the inside, the lesser known interrupts, you'll see something like Fell Flames. Fell Flames is the cast by the imps inside the vision room. So some things don't always have to be interrupted. Things like Shadow Word Agony on Sakarthar. There's not a lot of things that have to be interrupted, so just pay attention when you're going through this. Hey, yeah, a lot of these interrupts were missed, but did we have to get them? And did we interrupt the things that we had to interrupt, like the Rending Howl? And then same thing for dispels. If we move on to fight that has dispels, like Sakarthar, seeing things like Shadow Word Agony don't have to be interrupted because they can be dispelled. And we can see that Eliana did a lot of dispelling through both her Mass Dispel and her normal Dispel. And we can see that over here on this table, things that are dispellable like a dot, these are the dots that ticked through their entire life. And I think a better example of that is if we go to Council for Mark of the Necromancer. And see each fight, because there's a different amount of damage going out for Necromancer, we can see both the purple level and the red level of Mercs. Okay. And then casts, if you want to go in and check to see how someone's actually using an ability, or using their abilities, or if you're unsure of someone's opener, and you want to know precisely what they did, you can use the cast area. Now let's click on Kresimir. So we can see the number of casts that were made. However, if you go to timeline, it's a little bit easier to read, because you can see precisely when they cast what they casted. Okay. So, for this fight, we can see that Kresimir opened with Shadow Word Pay and Vampiric Touch on Blade Master, and then cast Vampiric Touch on Blood Boil, then followed by a Shadow Word Pain, and then in the meantime a Shadowy Apparition, so the Shadow Priest's passive affected just went by itself. And then you can scroll up and down through the fight second by second to see exactly what each person did, how long they spent cast timing, what they were doing, how often they stuff procs, how often crits proc. But a useful tool. And once again, you can go up here by summons, by whatever. Yeah. So that's the Analyze tab. So that's just independently looking at what you're doing and what your guild is doing, either as a whole or by the players. Next, we'll move on to the Compare tab. Well, let's go to the Problems tab first, actually. Okay, so for each fight, there'll be a general summary of the fight. And then also, recently, they've added the strategy guide from Wowhead. Okay. And then you'll see a average eye level of everyone in your party, and then the minimum eye level required to beat the boss. Now this is inflated because sometimes people will bring in very, very under-geared characters just for the sake of making this lower. So if you have a group of 11 people, 10 of them are 720, but then one of them takes off all his gear and sits at 0, then we're going to see that average drop by 70 points. So from a healing perspective and a regular perspective, we always know that people should be using their potions and people should be using their healing tonics. Not their health stones, but their healing tonics, because they heal for a little bit more. So if you're in a progression fight, you can go in and see who's missing their pre-pot, who's missing their execution pot, who's missing their health stone use or their healing tonic use. Now, after this main page, you'll go into avoidable damage. Now, for each boss, it will subdivide the avoidable damage into different categories based on where that damage came from. So you can see if people are having problems with a specific mechanic, it'll be right here. So in the case of Council, Fellblade is the boomerang that comes out, and that's completely avoidable. So not only we can see the damage taken from that avoidable mechanic, but we can see how many specific times it hit them. So something like Fury Drew took almost 200k, 100k from each hit of the blade. But we can see down here that Erzu or Cress didn't take nearly as much damage from the same hit. So that means that they were shielded, or that they had a personal defensive up to lessen that damage incoming. So sometimes the way positioning is, someone won't be able to avoid something, but they can see it coming and take a defensive. So if they're taking lower damage than everyone else for their avoidable damage, but still getting hit the same number of times, that just means they're in a position where they know they're going to get hit anyway, so they're going to pop a defensive to try to survive it. And then, after avoidable damage, each fight will go through and have very fight-specific mechanics. So for Council, that's Mark of the Necromancer, which is the dot that gets higher and higher and higher. Once again, so in this thing, you'll see people that died due to Mark of the Necromancer without it getting dispelled. And then any other mechanics that you may have not had issues with, it'll mark as passed, and that way you don't really have to deal with it because you're within an acceptable range. So once again, like the tanking debuff, our tank had no problem with it because the metric is 20 or less stacks. And then Wicked Strike, it's the attack that Jubithos does, but we can see that no one died from it. And Fell Storm, when you mix the copies, once again just showing, hey, if someone died from it, that means your healers are having issues with it. Once again, we'll go into specific fight details on individual fight videos. Now, through this tab, there's one thing that you can look at. This isn't the best example of it, but you can ignore events after a certain number of players have died. Okay, so let's say the Raid Leader's policy is, hey, if 2 people die by this point, I'm going to call a wipe. So what we can do is, if you filter by after 2 players have died, in this case it's not going to change any of the actual numbers just because no one died in this fight, I believe. But that means that after 2 players have died, people that are suiciding, going to stand in fire to die to make the wipe process faster, it's not going to count those events after the first 2 players have died, thereby having the wipe called. So, moving on to the compare. So, once we get into the compare tab, this is a very effective way to search and help your individual players. It's very self-explanatory, but we're gonna take a look at it anyway. Let's take me, because I know I'm a bad elemental shaman. So what this is going to do, once again, it's pretty self-explanatory. So it's going to look to fights whose durations are within 10 seconds of the fight. So that's plus or minus 10, and you can change this to whatever you want it to be, but 10 seconds is the good baseline. So for this fight was 4 minutes and 33 seconds. So it's going to look for all fights that were logged between 4 minutes 23 seconds and 4 minutes 43 seconds. And there's going to be no more difference than 2 players. So in this fight we had almost a full 30 people, so it'll look for 28 to 30 people. And it's going to look for all elemental shamans that are within 2 item levels of me. And it's going to do it for the entire past 28 days, so for the past month. Okay, so we can see that there's only 3 people that meet that. And right from the get-go, we can see that there are you can see their ability differences. So with the ability match, you want to try to get something, if they're comfortable with playing with the talents that they've chosen, you want to pick something that matches their abilities, that's the closest, that's the highest ranking yet closest matching to the talents that they've chosen. So if we go through here, we can see that he had a couple different talent choices than I did. And then you can click on his name and actually go through and look at his abilities. Now, if you continue, no, I'm going to go back for a sec. Yeah, but you can compare what you're doing versus what the other person's doing, or what one of your raiders is doing compared to what one of the top ranking people are doing. But still accounting for item level, accounting for talent use, accounting for kill times, accounting for number of people in group. And then last, well, not last but not least, but next to last, we have the rankings tab. So once again, if you have a higher paid account, or a free account will even do this, it just takes a little bit longer for the servers to process the ranking and put you in where you are and scoot everyone else down from where you squeezed in. But we can see rankings. Now, you have an overall rank percentage on the left. So this is out of every single person of your spec that has logged a part of the fight. So for Ladner here, he ranked 97th percentile, which means he was about 2,800 top marksman parse for heroic Hellfire Citadel out of 93,000 other people that have parsed that fight. Now, what's a little bit more important, especially as you're progressing, is to look over here to the bracket percentile. So that means that in a very small window of opportunity, usually about 2 item levels, how well is that for your item level? So, excuse me, for Ladder, that means he did 29% out of people 742 to 744. And you always have to take these with a grain of salt, because there's a lot of people who may not have the ranking if you're doing parses like this. Like, this is a heroic fight. We're going in with people that are under-geared, and we're going in with a lot of people. We're not going in for the express purpose of a ranking run. And a lot of these stats may be skewed, especially as you get to the higher item levels, because people are going back for the purposes of getting higher ranks and cheesing strategies or cheesing numbers. But in general, you can take the lower item level brackets pretty well. So Gosu here did 92 percentile for his bracket, which is pretty damn good. Especially it's a lower item bracket, so you can put more trust into that bracket number. Okay, now last but not least, we're going to go to the replay tab. Now, certain mechanics are very difficult to judge based on pure numbers. Sometimes you just wish you had a replay so you can see how that person moved, or where that person moved to, or how long did it take them to notice something. So the replay tab, as long as you have advanced combat logging enabled inside your log and inside World of Warcraft itself, Warcraft Logs allows you to use this replay function. Now, I can just play the entire fight, so everyone will load in, and each dot represents a character. And there's certain boss icons as well, so we can see each boss where they're at, or they're doing, where they're positioned. And you can also see debuffs on each player as they get them. So if we play and skip ahead, we can see that here this lock has the Blood Boil and also Mark of the Necromancer. So you can go through and see pretty quickly who has what, where they're getting the debuffs, and also the these are health bars, so you can see if someone's dying or something like that. So let's take someone like Yui, who is tanking right now, and we can play through. We see he has red Mark of the Necromancer, so we know he's about to get Reap. And over here, anyone that you highlight will be bold. And we can just play through, and I'm waiting for Reap to be cast, and we'll be able to see everyone run out to drop their Reaps. Here in a sec. I skipped it. Huh. So So, like, for example, you can see this priest, Kresmir, going all the way back here to drop his reap, and then running back in. So that comes in handy in fights like this, fights where you have to maintain a certain spread. You can go in and see who's running around into each other, or who's moving unneededly. But yeah, so this is a great tool. This is probably the most time consuming though, because you have to go in and see who's going what, and then you can look at whatever. But it does allow for their positions specifically to be marked, so you can go back and see if someone's dropping Doom from Gorfiend in the middle of the group. You can go and see who it is pretty easily and where they were. As opposed to just they had Doom and didn't move, you can see where they were going before and where they were going after. Yeah, you can zoom in just like anything else. You also see cast times and buffs on individual players and bosses. So you can see if they were trying to finish a cast before moving or something like that. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it for this one. Pretty sure. Yeah. Oh, one other thing. We're going to go into specific logs. So, back at the home screen, we can go just to zones. And let's take a look at Hellfire Assault rankings. So, we're moving from guild specific and server specific to worldwide. So, we can see the top parsing numbers for everyone, and then we can filter it back down to whatever we're looking at. So we can see for Hellfire Citadel, some people are doing a crazy lot of damage, and they're all from Paragon. Imagine that. Once again, when you're going to top logs, don't let the numbers intimidate you, because a lot of the time it will be a strategy of cheesing numbers, and very cheesy sometimes. But if you're trying to make yourself better as your individual spec, you can go through and sort it by individual spec. Now this won't be for item level, this will just be the top parses, period. But if for some reason you want to see how you can do better within your item level, but not parse it by number of people or anything like that, you can just simply click an item level parse. And then there you go. All the numbers that you can go to. So you can set like a manual look for a parse. And then you can go in and click on a list. And by the way, if a log's in a different language, because it's still Warcraft, everything's coded basically the same, you can go in and translate. Names will still be, in this case, in Korean, but the actual mechanics, or your actual attack names and stuff like that, will be translated for you. And then next to players rankings, just go back home really quick. Oh, not player rankings, but the statistics page. Okay, so this is a general knowledge page that you can go in to see what specs are doing best at what fights recently. So right now I have it parsed all bosses, but let's go into something like Hellfire Assault. So we can see that over the last 2 weeks in the top 75th percentile, so out of the top 25% of people, we can see that Fury Warriors are doing the best on Mythic Hellfire Assault, and that Assassination Rogues are doing the worst, followed by Survivor Hunters. But we can play around with the toggles a lot. Like, let's go up to something like Vilhari. So we can see that out of the 71st percentile, Fire Mages are doing a lot. But if we take it down to something like the 50th percentile, so we're including more parses of the general people, not just the top echelon of skill, but taking into account more average people, we can see that arms warriors for Vihari top out over the past 2 weeks. But if we go to something like the 99th percentile, we can see that fire mages are dominating pretty much everything if I go back to all bosses, I think. Yeah. So fire goes back up to complete dominance. Not a lot of parses though, as opposed to arcane. But just a lot of statistical information that you may find helpful when you're looking, hey, what do I need to recruit because we're progressing on this boss, or what's not doing well at all, and if someone's playing this spec right now, it's just sadly not viable, and they should maybe take a look at learning a new spec. And for this, like, in this tier right now, at the time of this video, Survival Hunter, Assassination Rogue are doing about half of what fire mages are doing. But I think that pretty much concludes this video really quick. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, just drop a comment down in the video. Make sure to subscribe, like, it helps me out a lot. And looking forward to the next video. And if you guys have any suggestions for specific videos, once again, there'll be individual boss videos coming up down the pipe, and then individual spec videos looking at how to check for uptimes, how to check for specific proper rotation, stuff like that, in another series of videos as we get through this. Thanks.